Hey Connor, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back.
Of course, excited to have you back. Thanks for agreeing to come back. On the first episode that you and I did together, we discussed two major differences between the UK, primarily Ireland, because that's where you're from originally, although not living, right? You're in Amsterdam, I think you said.
I'm actually back in Ireland now.
You're
Um,
back.
yeah, basically every time you'll talk to me, I'll be in a different location.
Awesome. I love it.
Yeah,
That makes
kind
it
of fun.
exciting.
Mm.
All right, so you're back in Ireland. We talked about on the last episode the differences between the UK hairdressing in the UK and the US. Number one difference is in how the countries handle licensing. I'm sorry, not the number one difference, but the first thing we talked about was how the different countries handled licensing of beauty professionals differently. And the second thing we talked about was the difference in the culture that affected how beauty professionals and salons price themselves. That was super interesting. Listeners, go back and listen to that before this episode, I would suggest. For this episode, let's start with education. I know that you've been educating for quite a while now. You travel around educating. Have you been educating for brands or within your own platform?
So I try to do a bit of everything, which would be the downfall of me. But essentially, I do a little bit of everything. So my whole approach to education when it first came out was that I would be like brand neutral. So that it meant if somebody from, let's say, Wella or L'Oreal or Schwarzkopf or whatever came to me, I'd still be able to deliver something of value. Then as like social media grew, brands did get interested. But even as I started collaborating with them, I focus nearly always on technique. So it's always around like how we do it, the kind of methodology behind it, so that again I can kind of translate it across the brands. So I do a bit of both. Do my own completely independent stuff that features the brands I use, but we try and make it as brand neutral. So even we would use like, if this is this color, this is what it is literally. Will be like blue, violet, yellow, gold, whatever. And then I would, on behalf of the brands, come in and do a bit of education and showcasing for them as well.
Okay. So how do you manage being behind the chair with clients? Because in the last episode, you said you have some percentage of your time that you're doing clients and managing your own education and doing education for brands and creating content. How does that even happen? Do you have an assistant?
Yeah, it's a really good question that I'm still trying to find the answer to. So it's something that I always say to people, like, it is a juggling act. I don't always believe people have to niche off and pick one particular thing, but I find when you start to specialize in anything in the industry, whether it be like photo shoots or education or a particular type of client work, it starts to pull you in one direction or another, and you kind of have to make that decision, which is going to be your main goal. So yeah, primarily it's education. I do a small bit of clients, and then the content side of stuff as well. We've got like 3 different public platforms and a private platform to manage. So it is a lot. I have a manager who works with me and manages all my projects. I have an admin manager, and then I've got my agent and stuff. So it's a team that sort of has grown up, but I think it's important to be transparent about that as well, because I think sometimes people can see the work that like we do as content creators or educators and think, oh sure, like anybody could do that. But actually there are barriers, there are things like time and stuff, and it has taken me a lot of investment to figure out how to like delegate that time efficiently, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not just the time. It's one thing to say it takes a lot of time, but it's keeping yourself focused on let's say there's 4 things that you're doing, 4 primary things that you're doing. In some days are going to require 1 and 2. Some days are going to require 2 and 4. Some days are going to require 1 and 3. Just the nature of the business requires it. And you may not want to do 1 and 3. Your brain is not in number 3. Like you're annoyed by by the person that you're working with on number 3, and you don't want to deal with it. So that's where discipline comes in. And I would say in the last 5 episodes that we've done here on the Hair Game podcast, discipline has come up. Not just me, but our guests have brought it up as being a major component to being successful in anything, this industry included. So what do you do when your day requires you to spend time on number 1 and number 3, and you feel like doing anything but?
Yeah, again, these are great questions that I still ask myself every day. That I'm like, how will I get through these things? The best advice I have for people, especially whenever I talk to people around social media, or if they're considering branching out into things like education, is you do have to compartmentalize. You do have to divide your time really kind of strategically, because it's exactly as you said. If I've come into the salon and I've done like 5 clients, which again would be like insane numbers for me, because I do big like color transformations more than anything, and I'm very slow. But if I've had a really stressful day, I want that day over. I don't want that day to end and then I have to go sit in my car and put together like an Instagram reel or a TikTok or anything like that. When I'm burnt out, I'm hating the world, and I don't want it to come across in the content. So I generally try do one thing a day, which sounds very simple, but that one thing could have 20 million parts. So for example, today was all filming. So I filmed some stuff for content, I filmed some stuff for the education platform, and that's all I'll do today. And it took the whole day. Even setting it up took about an hour and a half, but I'll know that's done, and then I'll have another day tomorrow, which is editing, which will have me sorted for maybe about a week or 2 worth of content. And then I've got like 2 days clients this week that I just don't have to worry about it. I can just go in, I can actually enjoy doing hair, because to be honest, doing hair and doing content at the same time can suck the life out of both of them, especially if you're under pressure, if you're under like specific kind of like time constraints or, you know, specific results. So even within that, I will segment specific client days for content creation, because there was a time when I would try to do 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 things a day. And what ends up happening is you only get a very small bit of everything done every day. And it starts to really, really, really get on top of you. And you can start to build these sort of like barriers that will make you feel like things are a lot more difficult than they are, because your days are just running into each other.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I kind of heard you say at the end there, I think you said build. Things accumulate. Like if you don't finish, like for me, I do a lot of administrative stuff in my job. And a lot of administrative stuff works off of email, right? And so if I get to the end of the day and I wrap it up and I have not gotten through all of my emails, they accumulate to the next day. And it makes the following day harder. And so I imagine that is absolutely the same with you and what you're doing. If you don't wrap things up, then they accumulate to the next day, and that could contribute to that kind of sense of overwhelm.
Oh, absolutely. And it's always like one of my weaknesses. And again, because I like am a diagnosed neurodiverse person, it's the final details and things I suck at. I can have these really big plans. I can hit the ground with like serious steam. And then if it gets to that like tail end of finishing a project, I'm just like, oh, and if I then put that off to like a week, I've no interest in it. And then if you combine that with it's at the end of a busy day, or now all of a sudden it's stressful because you've got a deadline tomorrow or something, it just doesn't work for me. So what I've learned is that I just need to segment things. I need to be like, these are the days for this, these are the days for this. And actually, it's funny we're having this conversation, because as much as I try preach that type of structure, it very easily can just descend and start to amalgamate all together. And that's what's happened over the last kind of couple of weeks. And we literally just had a big meeting there where we were like, okay, this needs to all get separated out again. And same thing, we looked ahead for the next couple of months. This is the filming days, this is the editing days, this is the client days, this is the client filming days. And it's a fantasy. It won't always be like that, but at the very least, you've put in some sort of structure that it means you're using this part of your brain one day, this part of your brain the other day, and it can allow you to kind of then flow into it with a bit of enjoyment, as opposed to just being like, what next? Always is just feeling like, what next?
Yeah, I love that. And that's, of course, the goal, is that it happens like that. Reminds me of something that somebody smarter than I said one time. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So when you feel like, that
with disgust.
The unattainable task, seemingly impossible thing of eating an elephant, the only way to do it is one bite at a time. So if you focus on one little step at a time, eventually you will have eaten the whole elephant. You will have, accomplished that insurmountable task. So, okay, neurodiversity. So I wrote down neurodiversity on my notes from episode 1. You mentioned it in episode 1. You just mentioned it again. So this is as good a time as ever to tell us what neurodiversity is.
Absolutely. I really threw you that segue as well. I was like, okay, let's see what he bites.
Did you consciously?
Of course I did. This is not my first rodeo.
You're a pro.
Yeah, pro podcast interviewee. Neurodiversity is a term by, I believe the woman's name is Judy Singer or Zinger. I'm pretty sure it's Judy Singer. And she was a very intelligent woman who essentially lives with autism. And essentially she was sick of people saying she was less than, or like that there was something quote unquote wrong with her. So she coined the term, and neurodiversity is simply just recognizing that there is different capacities, different navigations in how people kind of consume information, share information. That's essentially it. It's essentially acknowledging that everybody's brains could work differently. And some of that falls into a diagnostic criteria. So you have things like ADHD, autism, depending on who you speak to within that umbrella as well, could be things like dyslexia, dyspraxia, different kind of social sort of variations, anything that's kind of atypical within that. And all that it is a blanket term saying, yeah, there's different ways that people's brains work. And that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Okay. And I believe in episode 1, you mentioned it in the context of you as an educator. Mm-hmm. How do you try to convey the information to the people who are in your classes, recognizing that 10% of them are going to, recognizing that they're all neurodiverse, that 10% are going to learn best in this way, 25% are going to learn best in that way, so on and so forth. So as an educator, how do you use the knowledge that your students all learn differently to guide you in trying to deliver the information?
It's quite a big question, but the answer can be made very simple, and that it's you won't always get it right. But what we try to do is acknowledge that, because I think the biggest mistake people do is they will go, okay, well, I've learned a couple of things about, let's say, ADHD, so now I'm going to implement that one thing. But then within ADHD, you have hyperattentive or low attentive. There's so many different things, right? So what we did with our education is we've been researching, to be honest, for the last kind of 2 years. I've done talks and stuff around it. I've worked with like government bodies and stuff around it. I've collaborated with non-hairdressing entities that work within neurodiversity and stuff as well, that have access to research. And essentially we gathered all of that. And at the end of it, we're still like, oh crap, it's actually just the more you dig into it, the more complex it is and the more like variations there is. But actually, all that you can do is arm yourself with as much knowledge as you physically can, and then it's about providing options. So when we go into or if I go into a learning situation, or if I create content, or even on the platform, as you said, there could be 10%, 20%, 50%, whatever, of people that will learn in a different way, or people who retain information a different way, or their attention is retained a different way. So we have a neurodiverse inspired way of delivering things. So we base it off the ADHD model, which would be that you want it to be really dopamine rich, so that like things that are really short and snappy videos, things that are very transparent, the what, why, how from the beginning, so that you know what you're getting into, you know how long things are. We try introduce novelty through everything. So sometimes the tutorials are done like comedy, sometimes they're done like sketch. We also have options for how they want to consume the media, whether it's they want to watch the videos, or we have it in terms of different printouts. We have the notes already typed up. We do summaries. Or another feature that we have is a voice note feature, which is essentially we turn the tutorials into the style of a voice note that you'd send a friend if you've just finished a day in the salon and you're just talking about a client, because then again, you've introduced novelty, but you've removed the learning/school experience. That could be a whole other thing that prevents people from learning, because it can be a bit triggering. And even at the end of all that we're saying is we recognize that you all learn differently. Here are a couple of different ways, of which we base on the one model, which is ADHD, but we expand it outwards. Because the thing is, neurodiverse ways of teaching are relevant to everyone, but typical ways of teaching are not, if that makes sense. So even if you're a person with a perfectly quote unquote typical brain that, you know, you are as kind of like linear as it gets when it comes to your brain function, you would still benefit from the novelty of an ADHD inspired way of teaching, because you'd be like, this is kind of fun. This is all of a sudden a bit like addictive. This is whatever. And then at the end of all that, we still kind of go, if anybody else has anything else, just let us know. So it's just always being open to listening, always being open to feedback. And you can't please everybody, unfortunately, in life, but you can make everybody feel heard or valued, or not afraid to speak up or feel embarrassed about whatever, learning capacity that they have.
Very interesting. So it's much harder to do that. It's much harder to educate that way, right? I mean,
you can't. Well, interestingly, for me, I'm actually having way more fun with it, because I'm delivering the information for somebody who might have a similar brain to me. So when it comes to especially like ADHD, I if we were to zone in on one, ADHD relies essentially on dopamine. So what it is that your dopamine production in your brain is atypical to kind of, let's say, another person. So dopamine is your reward kind of thing. So dopamine is, if you like clean your room and then you forget you've cleaned your room, then you walk back in, it's super clean, and that feeling you get, that's dopamine, right? Cool. And that like motivates you, inspires you onwards. Whereas some people with ADHD, they're getting only maybe, let's say, to put a figure on it, let's half as much dopamine. So your payoff can be less. So your motivation to do it can be less. Okay. So yeah, so it's kind of, or it can go very far the other way, where you're getting way more dopamine than somebody else, but for something very like odd or something quite random. And that's why you would have distractibility and stuff. Okay. So it comes down to this dysregulation, and how you can tackle that within education and learning is always having things change, always having novelty, always having things really clear in terms of, all right, I'm going to get this information to you in 30 seconds. Because actually some of the research shows that people with ADHD can retain information way faster and can grab information much quicker if it's delivered to them faster than, let's say, somebody else. So we would try do our tutorials like that, and in doing that, actually it's more fun for me in a sense, because I get to have fun with it. I don't have to like confine to a professional way of doing it. I can play around with it. I can have novelty. I can be ridiculous. And then to me, it also keeps me on track, because I don't feel like I'm just copying and pasting the same thing over and over again.
Amazing. Okay. So talk about the platforms on which you're educating. Is this virtual? Do you travel? I know you travel around a certain amount, but tell us how you're doing it.
So yeah, we do it through a couple of different things. So in person definitely is important. I tried and failed to rely too much on virtual when COVID lifted, because, I think virtual for a lot of us who worked in the industry was like peak time was COVID, right? You were like, oh my God, everybody suddenly wants to do all this online stuff. And then when that lifted, people were like, no, I want to actually leave the house again. I want to go to events. I want to do all these kind of things. So I do a bit of both. The virtual one, we've just launched the platform at the minute. We use this app called Kajabi that we now have it like configured to our own app. And they're great because it's very like, it guides you through the tutorials really effortlessly. You can have it like none of our tutorials are longer than, they might be 8 or 9 minutes, but they're broken up into 1 or 2 minute videos. Very snappy, all your resources there. And again, you can choose how you consume it. So that one we've just launched, and it's still in its infancy, but it's doing pretty well. The feedback is really good. It's really, we're getting some really positive things from people who say they would normally really struggle to sit down at a laptop or a phone. And especially even, again, your typical hairdresser, we're used to moving a lot, right? So that's what our always goal with it from the start has been, that like you can go onto it and enjoy it and pick up something and learn something, and it's just in your pocket. And then when it comes to the in-person stuff, haven't done a huge amount of it with the new kind of teaching stuff, but generally whenever I'm doing with events, whenever I'm doing with brands, I will give them like a guideline for how I will deliver things in like a neuro-friendly way or a neurodiverse way. And they're always really receptive to it. So it's, again, note, like, instead of like, I'm going to stand in front of everybody and do a 2.5 hour blonding transformation that is going to essentially be the same thing over and over again, I'm going to have 80% of it done. And while I'm doing half of it, I'll explain what I'm doing. And then when I get to the other bit, I'm just going to go through the rest of the head and explain. And people will retain the same amount of information. We also are really big on like audience participation. So I don't believe that hairdressers are designed to sit down. for extended periods of time, because again, we just are not used to it above everything else. So I'm very allergic to walking in and having everybody sit down for 5, 6, 7 hours. We'd be big on, again, choosing how people want to interact. So we would often set up like, there's mannequin heads here, there's dolls heads here, there's color. If you're a kinetic learner, get up and start using the stuff. If you prefer to sit, here you go. If you prefer to take notes, no problem. If not, here is we'd use like a QR code. All the notes are there for you if you want to get this in a condensed video file. So again, always around options, always around novelty. And it's just kind of starting, but the feedback has been amazing. It's been really incredible to see people get back into learning, because they were kind of almost alienated out of it because the one or two different ways of doing it didn't work for them.
Very interesting, and probably hard to manage those various ways of doing it. But very, very interesting. All right, so let's change gears a little bit. Let's talk about social media. We're in 2023. Social media's been around. Instagram probably got really popular about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And so it's pretty mature now, right? The platform it keeps changing. We've gotten some new entrants into the social media landscape, notably TikTok. Let's talk about, first, just kind of introduce us to how you engage with social media. Are you big on Instagram and TikTok, or do you focus on one or the other? And and how do you perceive the whole thing these days?
I think social media, like the general opinion on it, my relationship with social media, the overall public consensus of social media, it just oscillates, right? It goes up and down, it goes up and down. So you'll get people saying, oh, social media is dead, it's not important anymore. And then the next month it'll be like, everybody needs to be on this. Likewise, I go through like constantly being like, this is fantastic. And then I'm like, this is evil, regularly. And I think a lot of people do. And I think it's really important to, first of all, normalize that. Social media is wildly unpredictable. It's unpredictable in how it like impacts things, and how it sparks or starts conversations, and how it like promotes things or doesn't promote things, or all that kind of stuff. So the first thing is that it's just, you need to take social media day by day, right? I don't think anybody making like huge predictions over it or like getting too analytical over it can really be beneficial. This is somebody who's coming from me, and I've worked in social media now for like 5 years, like as in full time. How I use the platforms and how I relate to them is, TikTok initially for me was a testing platform. So I downloaded it, because everybody's like, you have to be on TikTok. So I was like, fine. So I just downloaded it, and what I would do is I would put content onto it to see how well it did, and if it did well, I would put it on Instagram. So it was sort of like my beta testing. And ironically, I have more followers now on TikTok than I do Instagram. However, my value is definitely Instagram. So the most simple way of kind of putting it is, TikTok for me is a discovery platform. So it's very good for sort of spitting you out into the kind of ether, and then all of a sudden you could land and get like millions of views on a video, and then all of a sudden your face is everywhere, and you can go on a very significant jump in followers. But Instagram is community. Instagram is, I think, the truer form of social network, in that you have the opportunity a lot more to network people. People are held a lot more accountable on Instagram. That's why we see a lot more trolling kind of stuff on TikTok, because there's a very easy way of being anonymous on TikTok, and it's right. Even with your For You page and stuff, people can just drop a comment and never think about it again. Whereas Instagram, you're generally seeing the people you follow or like related people. So yeah, and then Instagram, I just think in terms of business, it's a little bit more. And there are people that will definitely disagree with me on this, but I find that Instagram is more predictable and more steady as a business tool.
Interesting how you mentioned how TikTok is kind of almost like top of the funnel sort of a thing. If you think about a marketing funnel, the top of the funnel is kind of one's effort to go out there and get people who don't know about you and kind of enter into the process of getting to know you. Bottom of the funnel is somebody who becomes a customer, right? Somebody who becomes a customer entered into the funnel. And I'm describing this for those who don't know this metaphorical funnel that I'm talking about. A customer had to enter the funnel at some point. At this point, it's still word of mouth is number one in our industry. Every time I ask, whether I ask clients or I ask hairdressers word of mouth is still number one. So somebody who eventually becomes a client of a hairdresser, more often than not, was told about that hairdresser by a friend or something like that. And that's the entering of the funnel. And then they kind of go through this process of going to the Instagram page of the hairstylist. They're like, oh, their work looks good. And then they contact them and they make their way down the funnel until they're a customer. So interesting to think of TikTok as a top of the funnel sort of tool. And that's what has made TikTok so fascinating, is that it goes out broad to people who don't know you, right? That was kind of the thing. And then Instagram tried to create reels where it's not just people that are followed and following that are going to see that, but it's people who it's like an explore page, just like expounding the explore page. And then you saying Instagram is kind of more of a business type tool makes a lot of sense. Do you spend more time on Instagram or TikTok?
Oh, Instagram for sure. And Instagram, I would argue, is more work because, again, your community are a lot more connected to you. So, like with Instagram, I'm guaranteed a certain amount of views because your community generally will see your work. You've got a sort of different, kind of scroll feature that, people that interact with you, you're going to appear more. Whereas TikTok, like the views that I could be guaranteed vary wildly. Like I have 151,000, I think, on TikTok. I could put a video out there that could get less than 1,000 views, or I could put a video out there that could get a few million. I actually never know. Do you know what I mean? So like, I never really know. I'll have an idea if something's going to do okay-ish, but again, there's a lot more kind of mystery shrouded in the TikTok sort of workings, right? Because I could put a video out there, and how I test it is I just look at the likes to the view, whatever ratio that is. And if I get like, let's say 1 like for every 10 views, I know this is a really good piece of content and it's guaranteed to do well on TikTok because like on the meaty statistic level of it, it's what people want to see. But I could put that type of video on TikTok and the quality could be good, but it just won't go out there. Or I could put a video up on TikTok and not that many people are liking it, but suddenly hundreds of thousands of people are seeing it. So I find it like wildly unpredictable, but at that time I don't lose much sleep over it, right? Because it doesn't feel personal. It feels kind of just like, I'm just going to throw this out and see what happens. Whereas Instagram, I think you're kind of nurturing a community a little bit, and especially, you have a lot of things. You've got links on Instagram. You'll have like links in your bio. You'll have like stories. You have your DMs and stuff, which I definitely have turned off on TikTok. And these are the way people want to feel connected to you. So I think it definitely consumes a lot more of your time, but you feel the worth of it. You feel the value from it for sure.
You turned off DMs on TikTok. Why?
So in the same way that TikTok is like the Wild West sometimes, because again, you don't really have a huge amount of control who's going to see your content. So I've had it before where videos have gone viral, and I always say to this, I've gone viral lots and lots of times, and I don't say that as like a flex. I say it as a like eye roll, whatever. It's just like only going viral is only really beneficial if you've absolutely hammered home whatever niche that it is you're doing, and you've reached all those people, and that is like gold dust. It's so hard to do. And on Instagram, like even when new people see my content, they're generally pretty well categorized. They're generally reaching the right people. It's usually like hairdressers or educators or whatever. Whereas I've had stuff on TikTok go super viral, and very much the wrong people have seen it. I've had to like take off social media for a while over like very concerning hate comments, over like the most ridiculous stuff. I've had like very odd threatening comments over videos that seem very normal or benign. Like there was one where I did a hair extension in the front and I just basically turned it into a silver stripe. That was it. And like that like invoked a very odd level of hate comment towards me. That and on its own is enough, never mind turning on the option for people, complete strangers, to message you. Do you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of like MySpace days. Do you remember like where like anybody could just like go onto your MySpace and just say whatever they wanted? Like it sometimes feels a bit like that.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, I mean, Instagram's like that too, unless you have some privacy filters. But interesting about TikTok, and I guess you bring that back to the anonymity that you mentioned before with TikTok, relatively anonymous to Instagram, although Instagram has an anonymity sort of quality to it as well. I mean, I've of course had some bizarre comments by people, and very, very interesting. And I'll drop a little anecdote really quick, just kind of interesting. I got a hateful comment once. This is going back a number of years, actually probably pre-COVID. And somebody wrote something horrible, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to engage with this person. And it turns out that it was a he, and he was from a Middle Eastern country and hated America. And I think we started DMing, and he and I went back and forth for probably a week because I was fascinated. I was really just utterly fascinated, like he was wishing me death and stuff. And we started DMing, and he talked about how horrible he thought America was. And it became this really kind of enlightening conversation about the things that he's told in his country and why he wishes death upon us. So that was the only time where I ever really engaged with a hater. But that just tells you how broad, the reach is of Instagram. It reaches into areas and cultures that are the opposite of ours, and allows people to communicate. And thankfully we can delete comments and things like that. So very powerful tool, these social media platforms. And right now it seems like one of the big conversations in the public domain is a lot of the negativity that comes out of them. Wall Street Journal has put a lot of effort into trying to do an analysis on some of the negatives, particularly with teenagers with social media. And there were some very interesting stories about how some of the insiders, some of the executives within Instagram, particularly one guy who was in the security kind of, he had a security role within Instagram, and he had a teenage daughter. And the teenage daughter started engaging with Instagram and went to her dad, and she's like, "Dad, like, look at what's happening in my DMs. Like, I'm having so much inbound, weird, sordid sort of communication from people who are, asking me to do horrible things." And so, it's something that has to be managed very, very carefully for the broader spectrum. But again, I use the word tool because it can be used for very good, and it could be used to market your business. In our industry, it's been, I think, a very, very positive thing when used properly. And whoever the user is using it, let's say the average hairdresser, as long as they can manage it in such a way that it doesn't drive them insane or make them stay up late every single night to where they're sleep deprived and various things like that, it can be very, very positive. So that was kind of a long-winded monologue that I just gave there, but getting back to kind of the point that I really want to focus on, is there value for a hairdresser to spend time on TikTok if she hasn't been yet?
I would say so. I think if you're already on Instagram, let's say, if you're already producing content, you're happily doing that, and you just haven't really branched out into TikTok, it really doesn't have to be any extra work. I know a lot of people will talk about that you need to format differently for TikTok. Yeah, I guess, but it depends on how serious you want to take it, right? If you want it to be your full-time job to be a content creator, then yeah, you'll probably have to spend an extra bit of time creating TikTok specific content. But if you're a hairdresser and you're already producing content for Instagram, just put it on TikTok as well. Do you know what I mean? What I would say though, and I don't know how they do it, and it could just be very odd confirmation bias, but I have found, and so have a lot of other creators, that if you put things on TikTok first, they do better. If you put something on Instagram first and then put it on TikTok, it nearly always flops. It's like they know. It's like it can sense that it already exists somewhere online. And I don't know if you would have servers with capacity to do that, but it's something that I've observed anyway, that it's like, oh, this is old or recycled or something. It never seems to do as well. So my general rule of thumb is I'll just make a video and I'll put it on TikTok 2 or 3 days earlier. And even if it flops, it really doesn't matter, because it's not like a reflection of your overall engagement or your community or whatever. It's just like, oh, that video didn't do so well. It still might do well on Instagram, but for no extra work, you potentially have doubled your audience. And every now and then, even if it's just once every like 2 months, something could just kick off, and that's still maybe an extra, even if it's only 1,000 views, even if it's 100,000 views or 1,000,000 views, whatever, that you just got for free, just off a different platform.
I love that. No, I think that's phenomenal and great advice. So what keeps you up these days?
In general?
What keeps you up at night?
In social media world?
Just generally.
Just generally. Classic existentialism. Are we doing enough? Are we like, is this enough impact we're having in the world? All this kind of stuff. Definitely with like social media, I can be really volatile and a super hostile place, especially, with current political climates and stuff like that. And I do sometimes feel a little bit like, am I just, ignoring everything that's going on by coming on and doing my videos with like hair, or doing like talking about like a thing of shampoo or making a skit or whatever. But then what you do have to remind yourself as well is there needs to be that too. There needs to be a consistent thing happening with like creators with, I will often get many messages saying, are you not going to talk about this conflict? Are you not going to do this? And I'm like, man, like if you're coming to me, a hairdressing like content creator, to try, get verified political facts or intel or information, I was like, save the time you spend typing me that message and pop it into like a non-biased media source and get it that way. So sometimes that gets me. I'm like, could we be making more impact or whatever? But then you just kind of have to remind yourself, actually, like, so what people do need is a bit of escapism. What people do need is consistency. What people do need are some safe areas within their job or within like whatever that is. And I guess that kind of it's reassuring to be providing that too,
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. I mean, do people go to you for political opinions? I think that that not every voice has to cover every topic that the audience wants it to cover. I think
exactly.
So yeah, I'll just leave it there. But that's not going to change. I'm not going to leave it there. That's not going to change some of your audience wanting, your voice on hair education to opine on, A, B, C, and D.
I know. But the thing is as well, like with social media, the way information is shared and consumed is so much faster than what we're naturally capable of, what we're naturally meant to do. Like if you look at like 100 years ago even, right? You got your information by like piece of media or somebody told you, and that was it, right? Whereas we wake up in the morning now and I actually make an effort not to turn or go on social media until about like 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. until I've done loads of other things first. Because there's actually loads of research around back to dopamine. If that's your brain's first exposure to dopamine in the morning, you actually crave it way more throughout the day. So you'd be on your phone more during the day and you rely on it. Anyway, I digress. But it's such fast media and also inaccurate a lot of the times. And the rate that it's being churned out and then distributed before it can be proven right or wrong is so rapid that like I actually am like, I'm not qualified to make that call when I share something. Do you know what I mean? I'm not an investigative journalist. I don't know that enough. And even if it's in support of one of my views, I still am like, I'm not going to share this because it could very easily be proven that, oh, actually they got that wrong, or all this kind of stuff. So I kind of just stay out of it. But if I am approached by it, I'll be like, look, the reason I do this isn't because I'm ignorant of what's happening in the world or all these big issues. It's because I don't think I can add value to it, and I want to be a consistent space for people that doesn't have to come into their lives at some points,
Right. There's more appropriate voices to discuss those topics, and I'm 100% with you. And what a self-aware thing to say that just isn't said a whole lot these days is that, you know what? Gosh, I don't know all the details there, and so I am not the right person to opine on this. You have a sense of where you fall, but I'm definitely not going to. I'm not an expert on that, so I'm definitely not going to talk about it. So on the topic, kind of a corollary to what we were just talking about, political conversation in the chair. This has been a question that I've asked a few times before, but I'm going to ask it a little bit differently of you. What advice do you have for hairdressers who are empaths, who struggle with the daily barrage of weighty conversation with clients in the chair? And that could be personal conversation where the client, let's say, is struggling with her relationship with her husband. And, she wants to get it off her chest that she's, I don't know, she got a boyfriend or whatever. Or a conversation where the client sits in the chair and he's just outraged about something that happened politically. And this is what hairdressers behind the chair deal with. And so how do you arm yourself, protect yourself against, the toll that can take?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And it's something that I definitely would have struggled with. It's funny that you said about a woman struggling with her husband and now she's like a boyfriend. I literally had that feeling or that experience where a woman came in and told me all about her affair. But I actually knew her husband through the company and stuff. And I was like, I can't be hearing any of this. I think there needs to be, I think first of all, it happens less than you think as well, because you tend to attract your tribe as well. So you tend to attract like-minded clients, like-minded people. But within that, there always is a minority that are actually somehow ended up in front of you. And you're like, I have no idea why you still go to me, but I guess you must really like your hair. And I think there needs to be, like, are you going to benefit from engaging, right? So I've had people, like, look, if somebody's in some way racist or homophobic or stuff, like, that's different. That's like, I'm just actually not going to tolerate that. Right. But if somebody, and anybody, like, and nobody should ever make you feel uncomfortable. I think there's a line there. So if somebody makes you feel unsafe or uncomfortable or discriminated against, there needs to be a hard line that you just don't look after that person, and your management or yourself needs to support that. If it comes down to really dicey things like political views, religion, I know COVID was particularly turbulent as well, and still is. I think there needs to be a bit of separation of being like, just giving that person space to have their view, and like you kind of, I've sort of learned very vague responses, being like, oh really, and why is it you think that, or whatever, and I'll just let them say what they need to say, and then I'll try to change the topic. And because I've learned that it's not worth engaging a lot of the time. Like, I've nothing to gain. I've got disappointment with this person. I'm not going to change their mind over it. We've had a pretty good rapport up until this point. Is there anything for me to gain to like sinking into this? And I think a lot of people, especially empaths, sink into it. So I think it's definitely arming yourself with some vague responses for things that might come up that are a bit more on the dicier side, and sort of checking in, being like, in 2 hours time, this person's out of here. I don't need to change their mind about this thing, and actually then I can go on with the rest of my day. Or you can engage and they still leave in 2 hours, but now you hate your life or like the rest of your day, or like you're absolutely stressing out about like that experience for the rest of your life. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So I think there's certain hills that you're like, is it worth dying on this one for the sake of the next couple of hours,
Yeah. So just kind of give it the, oh, totally. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So how about that thing that happened this weekend? Right.
Yeah. I mean, like, oh, it's really interesting. You think that, would you like a fringe?
It's really interesting. You think that? That's funny. That might elicit maybe some blowback.
Potentially. I mean, it's always a risk. But then even when it comes to, let's say, with the empath, like just the offloading, like I've had clients come in that just had awful lives, and like they're sharing these things, and it is, you take it on and stuff, but there's like, I've learned to like cleanse myself almost sometimes after a full day of heavy clients, and that is just around like protecting your peace, which is like, I always think after a full day clients, you need to have like an hour by yourself and even do a little bit of meditation, a bit of breath work, and then remember yourself, remember your routine. And it's easier to do than what you think, but if you go straight from a full day of clients and you've had maybe 2 of those particularly heavy ones, like, and then you kind of immediately go home, make dinner, watch TV, and just go to bed, you will take it with you, right? And you will take it, especially if you get up the next day and you just roll into work and you do the same thing over and over again. So being aware of like restoring what's yours and creating rituals around that, I think, is really important.
I love that. When I have a series of really anxiety ridden conversations, and then it's alone time for me kind of at the end of the day, I find it helpful to have some almost meditative tools in my belt where to have something that I really enjoy to think about. So for example, I think about instead of my mind's thoughts and attention getting dragged back into those really annoying conversations, which it tends to do. I think human nature has us doing that. You literally, like a muscle, you just kind of have to flex your ability to focus on something else. And like for me, it's surfing. Oftentimes, I surfed quite a bit before I got married and had kids, and now it's a infrequent thing. Probably twice or three times a year max. But that doesn't matter. I still have all these memories of the feeling of it, and I literally think about all the little feelings. Like as I'm paddling in the water, I think about the feeling of the water on my fingertips. As I'm paddling, I feel the gliding of the board over the water, and I think about the wave coming, and I almost meditate myself away from the conversations that were very uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's visualization essentially, and it's a really good point, and it's great that you can access that. A lot of people can't. I think, and we're doing actually a challenge on Instagram at the minute over the broadcast thing, and it's just called Protect Your Peace. There's a curse word in there somewhere, but I won't share. And it's very much that we give little tasks every day, but they're not even around the tasks. It's around like making sure that you have that 10 to 15 minutes to just think of something else, focus on something else. And it's something that like I consciously have to do. Like anything, like mental health is health, right? So if you to work on your health by eating certain things, exercising, whatever it is, same with mental health, you have to exercise it. And I would be really big into meditation. I fell into it a good few years ago, and I was one of those people as well that was like, I could never sit still and do that kind of stuff. But when you find the right practice for you, but the power of even 10 minutes, like even I would say to people who would struggle with that, or like those anxiety kind of conversations, or worry about clients, or have stressful lives, I'm like, if you can even just as a starting point get up 10 minutes earlier and just have a coffee and sit down with no phone before you start your day, so you feel like you've claimed back a bit of control and you've got a bit of a base there. The difference in how much something gets to you is measurably different, because you're like, I know I have this at least to myself, these 10 minutes, nothing can happen here, nothing can change here, and I have this much control. And then you can just start to build on that by visualizing yourself surfing, for example. But it's I think it's really important.
What about horror stories, hair horror stories? Can I ask you your horror story?
Oh, yeah, of course.
I did? Or wait, of course you have them, but did I ask?
No, I don't think so. So ask away, because I have so many.
All right. So it could be any kind of hair horror story. It could have happened on the stage, could have happened in a salon. You could have been the cause of this horror, or you could have simply witnessed the hairdresser next to you.
Oh no, I've way too many of my own to kind of give you a by proxy story. I've had many. This one I can talk about because the statute of limitations is up. But I actually cut a small piece of someone's ear off before.
Oh no, the Mike Tyson.
Yeah, I went there. It was bad. It was only a very small piece, but it's still, you'd miss it.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I was only just qualified, and it's funny, I actually won't do these type of haircuts anymore, but I'm really good at scissors over comb. I used to much prefer to doing clipper work. I actually trained with a woman called Leanne Brown who did men's hair for Sassoon, and she was very much about that kind of life. So I felt very Sassoon with my scissors over comb. Mm-hmm. And I had this woman in who got a really, really short cropped haircut, and I'd finished it. It's always the last minute. I finished it. And then as I was like, she dusting the hair off her neck, I was like, I could probably take in, around here a little bit tighter. And I was so focused on like the top of my blade that I wasn't focusing on the heel. And I bend my hand in such a way, and the heel being the sharpest part of the scissors, right? Always. It just kind of nicely encapsulated over a small bit of her ear. And as I closed it it came off. Now it was very small,
Like
but
butter.
it made a noise.
No.
And yeah,
Wait,
it was like
she made a noise? What made the noise?
it was like I can't. It was like a that he picked up. It was like this air sound, and then she jumped, and then I jumped. We all jumped. The piece of ear is still in the air, and it was it was a very small piece of flesh, but still a piece of flesh all the same. And if you've ever nicked somebody's ear, or like if you've ever even sustained a minor head injury or a minor cut to your head or your ear, it bleeds. It bleeds like Carrie level horror show everywhere. And I defaulted.
And it doesn't stop quickly, does it?
No, not at all. And actually, she was very understanding, very kind. I remember running over to my manager and being like, I just got someone's ear. And my manager left. I think she just panicked and walked out. And I was like, ah. And then,
What?
so I know, I didn't know where she went. I just remember her not being there all of a sudden. And then I was like,
she didn't help with the situation at all. Like she didn't go to the client and be
know,
like,
I don't know what circumstances were happening there. And then, so I then brought out the first aid kit, and it was a really big salon. There was like 50 staff there, and everybody was like looking over. And I had, of course, there was a white towel around her neck, which was now red. And I sort of do this weird thing that I've had to like train out of myself. But when I'm in really, really uncomfortable situations, I start joking because
sure.
I don't know how else. It's a real Chandler Bing situation that I just don't know what other appropriate response to do other than being like, and crap jokes as well, not even like funny. I just be like, oh, that wasn't meant to be part of the service, or ha, this plaster looks great on you, doesn't it? And like, she was fine with it, but I see the joke for getting to her more than anything else.
Oh my
And
God.
yeah, in the end, she still came to me for several years after, but every time, and like, she was quite a dark skinned woman, and her ear had this very noticeable like dent that was white. And yeah, every time she came to me, which was every 6 to 8 weeks, I was reminded it would just be staring at me, and I was like, oh God, I really hope one day somebody doesn't say this to you and you decide to take it up in a legal arena.
Yeah.
So she did not, and everything is fine, but I will no longer do scissors over comb, or if I'm cutting anywhere around your ears, I make people hold their ears. That's how traumatized I was.
Smart. Well, that's smart, and that's the learning lesson, and that's why I asked the question. Wow.
Yeah, it's a bad one.
Very, very interesting. But, you know, a reasonably decent outcome for you, and you're lucky. You're lucky that the client was so nice about it.
I know. I actually was like, she wanted to pay. I was like, absolutely not. I was like, get out of here. I just maimed you. I was like, go. I was like, you're not paying for this service. No, I was really fortunate. And like, I would be the same. If somebody did that to me, I'd be like, it's fine. But like,
yeah.
It could have been very much not. Do you know what I mean? Right. So I do consider myself very lucky.
Well, that's hilarious. All right. Do you have any others that you have to get off your chest?
Do I have any others? Yeah, there's like, small things. I remember I had to convince a friend of mine to do stage work with me, so she had to model. And I was like, please, will you let me put yellow in your hair? And she was like, no. And I love yellow. I think it's an amazing color to put in people's hair. And she was like, I really don't want yellow. She's always been like ash blonde, cool blonde. And I was like, please, I'll just put like the tiniest little threads of yellow through. And then the rest of it's going to be like this really soft, buttery yellow. We'll be able to get it out in like 2 washes. It'll be fine. And on stage, halfway through, realized I mixed up the bowls. So instead of doing soft, like teeny threads of really bright, vibrant yellow with a very pale butter yellow backdrop, I had done neon yellow globally and was doing threads of butter yellow that you'd never even see. And I just had to like quietly whisper in her ear, and I was like, I'm so sorry. And I was like, but just so you know, it's really freaking yellow, and I need you just to pretend it's fine when we do the reveal. I'll fix it. I'll fix it. And it was fine. Just small things like that, but definitely the ear disfiguring is the worst one.
Yeah, that is definitely the best one. Any last words for the community?
Any last words to the community? Ooh, how broad and open.
That's right.
Just keep doing what you're doing. I think it's super tough out there at the minute. I think for everybody, every industry. I think hairdressers particular at the minute, it's super tough. Things are getting more expensive. Clients are probably having less money, and things can seem very out of everybody's hands and out of everybody's reach when we're seeing things on social media where we're aware that all this is going on, that like we're all feeling a financial crunch, but then it still seems that so many people are being wildly successful or like having these amazing things, and it's not real, right? I can tell you as somebody who puts out that type of content, like I try to be as transparent as I can, but people will still romanticize my life, and it's stressful. And I've met people at the very, very top of their game and realize that they're stressed as well. Everybody's going through it. So don't compare yourself to other people. Keep doing what you're doing, and it will all work out.
100%. Everybody's got their own things that they're dealing with.
Mm-hmm,
It's always
exactly
helpful
that.
to kind of keep that in mind when you're feeling overwhelmed and stressed yourself, isn't it?
Yeah, it's easier to share the burden with the globe.
It is. It is. All right, Connor. So where do you want people to look for you?
So you can find me at Connor JMD on most platforms. So it's one N, not two. So CONO or JMD for James Matthew Doyle. You can find me there. My website is Learn with Connor James Education, where we have all the online platform stuff that we've just launched. Just Connor James Education. Instagram. I'm basically everywhere. You can't get away from me. If you just type Connor James into Connor James Doyle into any Google or social media search engine, I'll pop up in some capacity.
Awesome. Great to meet you. And I, on behalf of all the listeners, thanks for the time.
Thank you so much for having me again.